Welcome to Monday Morning Express. Well, Roland, kind of a sad day. As we said, it's the last segment with Boyd Reyes.
Yeah, sure is, but look what we got.
We're more than making up with it because we have that special guest we promised, Mr. Bob Darwin. We gave a hint last week. We showed your book, so I think most of the guys knew you were coming. Yes.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Of course, you're a man of many skills. Master layout builder. We have this really great thing you brought us. Thank you so much. With some of the articles you've done at Model Railroader with super detailing, your workshop.
Here, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you've been kind of prolific through the hobby, and you got a lot of other skills too. So we're really looking forward to getting to know you a little better, and I think our viewers are going to really love it this episode as well.
Good.
So thanks for coming.
Looking forward to that, right?
Yeah. And I think the whole team has been looking for it. So, Bob, tell us a little bit about how you first kind of fell in love with trains, both model railroading and, of course, the real thing, the prototype.
Well, I was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Great railroad town, where the Pennsy went that way and the central New Jersey went that way. And the depot was, maybe 3 blocks from my house, where we were living at the time. So I must have been 7 or 8, I guess. And I would go down to the depot every afternoon after school with my knapsack on, and just sit in front of the depot at this bench and watch the trains go by. And of course, the central of New Jersey came through this way, and the Pennsy went up there. It was a perfect place to get all the action.
Lots of activity there, right?
Oh, are you kidding? I mean, a train every 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow.
Especially on the Pennsy. It was the main line. 4 tracks went right through the middle of town. The center tracks were for the through trains from New York to Washington, and the outside rails were for the locals, and much the same down with the Jersey Central. And where I sat at this bench, it was probably 15 feet from the nearest track. And of course, every time a train came by, I'd look at every car, I'd try to visualize what that car was, and all this kind of stuff. And after several months of this older gentleman came in. He said, "May I sit down?" And I said, "Yes," And he sat down and he looked at me and he said, "I've been watching you." And I said, "Uh-oh." I thought, "What have I done now?"
Yeah.
And he said, "You like trains, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I do too."
Yeah.
And he says, "Do you know what that is over there?" And I says, "No, it's a locomotive." He said, "No, well, what kind is that?" And he said, "That's a 460." And I said, "Oh," and then he'd explain to me what a 460 was. And then we came to the tender, and what was the tender for? And well, it had coal in it, and the coal goes into the engine. That's what makes the steam, and that's the way it runs. Wow, is that the way it goes, So after, I don't know, it seemed like every week I went there, I'd see him at least once. And he'd come and he'd sit down next to me and he'd explain something else about railroading in general and what we were looking at. The GG1s, wow, and what kind of a car is that? And passenger cars were hard at first for me to discern because they all looked the same. Well, they weren't.
Right.
If you look at the windows, this one's got to be a diner and this one's got to be a couch, Anyway, to make a long story short, that's the way I learned about trains. And one day I just described this gentleman to my dad, and he said, "I'd like to meet that gentleman," So my dad came down with me.
Right.
And my dad loved the whole idea of this guy teaching this kid, his boy, all about this beautiful hobby that we had. We all liked trains.
Right.
So the first thing I got from my dad was, I was about 10 years old, was naturally a Lionel.
But he started with the Lionel trains.
But luckily for me, my dad was a great helper. He built the entire layout for me. And he said, "When I get this done, then you can put up your trains, I had it all figured out already in advance. Exactly where each switch was going to go and where this building was going to go. And of course, the depot building, right?
Right.
And Lionel had a beautiful depot. And that was my first layout. And I played with that layout. I'd build onto it, put in more switches. And we even built the railroad out a little bit so I could get more track in,
Wow.
Nice.
Anyway, I realized right from the beginning that this wasn't really railroading. This was a toy.
Yeah.
And I said, as much as I like this, I loved the size. O-gauge was beautiful, I thought. But the trains don't go like that, real trains. They go like that, And one thing the old gentleman taught me about trains was right in front of the depot, there was a dip in the track like this. And every time a car went over it, you could see the journal in the truck go down, move down. And so I said to the man, I said, why does that do that, And then he explained to me that the axle was fitted with a spring that pushed the axle, the journal down against the dog bone to keep the thing level, And I thought that was fascinating.
Right.
And he said, well, it's the same as your dad's car has springs.
Right.
To keep each wheel on the track at the same time, or on the road at the same time. That's why it was. That's what springs are for, right?
You were quite a student at that age.
Yeah.
I was, and I even asked my dad. I said, "Well, how come these trucks on the Lionel aren't sprung?"
Right.
And he said, "Well, it's because it's a toy." And I immediately thought to myself, "That's not what I want. I want the real stuff."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, Sonny, if you want the real stuff, you got to go to scale model railroading." Oh, well, that's the whole secret.
New world.
So that's how I got started with scale model railroading. At first, I tried O-scale, but you have to have a room larger than a stadium to really run a good O-gauge railroad. So I settled for HO. But it wasn't until I moved to Los Angeles in '62 that I built my first HO layout. And that one, it was very modest because I had a very small basement, but it was enough. I had a 6-track yard in there and enough turnouts to at least have a semblance of some interesting activity going on.
I think the other interesting thing is most guys, like you moved out to Hollywood because you wanted to produce and direct movies, and so a lot of people would have just kind of put the hobby in the background for years, but you never really did.
I kept it up continuously.
Right.
In fact, when I was working in film, I loathed all the hours I wasted sitting on the set waiting for the director and the cinematographer to set up a shot. Because I was thinking, I could be home playing with my trains.
You should have had a little workshop. You could have been building on them.
No, seriously. I mean, Roland, I considered that a total waste of my time.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, I was making money doing this, but that was aside from the fact, I always, whatever I did, even when I was living in Paris, I took enough time to at least photograph trains. I went all over France and Germany, photographing all the railroads, all the locomotives, and there was still a lot of steam going on at that time. I loved it, wherever I went, I always sought out the steam or at least the locomotives. Last year, when John and I were in Germany, we were driving from Stuttgart to Berlin, and John says, "I hear there's a railroad around here someplace." And I said, "Well, let me look it up on the GPS, So I put the GPS on, and it was looking for a railroad, Sure enough, like maybe 10 miles away, here was a railroad line. I said, "Well, turn left here about 5 miles. We'll see if that's what you're looking for."
Sure.
Sure enough, we get within about 1,000 feet of this place, and we see this puff of smoke. I said,
"You found it." Yeah.
There's this cute little 210-2, red and black, as most German locomotives are, pulling about 5 or 6 little coaches behind it. It was 2 years ago. No, last year. It was last year, 2016. Actually pulling a train that was in service every day.
Wow.
From one city to the next. I didn't even know it existed. Leave it to John to figure that one out.
Yeah, John Gray. John's
Gray.
been on the show before.
Yes, he has.
Maybe we'll see him later, but I think he's busy looking at model trains right now.
Hey, you mentioned 1962.
Yes.
Right? And it happens to be, and if you look at Model Railroader, we had an article that you showed us here. Something about the super detailing of a big boy.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was a big project that I started because I felt that the models that were being produced at the time were not detailed enough for me. You know, there was a great little hobby shop in Los Angeles called Colonel Bob's, down on Olympic Boulevard, I think it was. And I went in there one day, and they had all these kits and stuff, and some brass, but most of the kits were cast metal kits. And the biggest one they had, the one that I really fell in love with, was the Bowser Challenger. And I thought, gee, that wouldn't be hard to build, you know. All the parts are there, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I bought the Bowser Challenger, put it together, and found that there was no detailing on it. I mean, you know, no pipes,
Right.
no generators, no valves of any kind, you know. And I thought, that's no good, you know. So I went back to Colonel Bob's and other hobby shops that we had then, and looking for, does anyone make parts? Well, there are some parts available, you know. I think Chemtron had a few parts out, but not the parts that fit on that locomotive. So I got into the habit of looking for photographs of the real locomotive and then trying to copy those parts myself.
Right.
And how did I do that? Well, first of all, we have a Zamac boiler, which is not, you can't solder to it, all right? So I made a generator from scratch out of pieces of brass, soldered it all together. It was a semblance of a generator. It was not really as close as I wanted it to be, but since the model wasn't either, it didn't make much difference.
Right.
I just wanted to add detail to make it look better. And then I would attach it to the boiler. Well, since I couldn't solder it onto the boiler, I drilled a hole through the boiler and put a screw on the inside and attached it that way.
There you go.
So there's always a way to do this.
Right.
And a buddy of mine, also a trained photographer, he tried, I showed him how to do this on smaller models. He had a, I forget what it was. I think it was a 060 of some sort. I don't know who even made it at the time, but it was also a cast boiler. We did the same thing on that one. And we added brass pipes to it, which we soldered together as a unit, okay? And then we attached that in two pieces with two screws on either end. Well, it worked. You know? But it wasn't really perfect. It was only the brass model that I could do that with. So eventually what I did was I went back to Colonel Bob's and I said, I understand that Tenshodo has a big boy and it's in brass. He says, yeah, we have one. You know, so I looked at this thing. I said, yeah, this is pretty empty. There's not much here, you know. So I stripped the model. I used automotive paint stripper, cleaned it up, and started adding parts to it. And luckily, I called Chemtron, the factory, and I asked for some aid. I said, do you have this kind of a part? Do you have this kind of a part? They said, no, but you can speak to Mr. Anderson, and he's in that department. So this was John Anderson. Now, I met John Anderson, and through John, I met Bruce Bechtold. Bruce was at the time, I believe he was the chief pattern maker for Chemtron. I didn't even know what a pattern maker was. So John and Bruce came up to the house one day and explained it to me. And he said, this is what you want to do. And I showed him parts that I had soldered together. And he said, that's good for what you've done, but this is the way you should do it. And Bruce and John mentored me into how to produce brass castings, the original patterns. And in the end, we produced all the parts for the big boy as a master set of castings for both the big boy and the Challenger. And we even marketed that set. It's even available today on eBay occasionally. that has all the parts that we produced for this series and for the Big Boy.
Yeah, I've
Challenger.
seen those. Yeah.
There's quite a few. If you look through this article, I have a list of there's probably 50 castings. I don't know how many more. The pipes are incredible.
And
In some of this article,
it's remarkable.
Yeah,
it's remarkable.
These are all handmade parts here.
Right.
These you have to make by hand because nobody made these parts.
And Bob, I want to interject this for our viewers because I think something I want, and we can all glean from this, is like at that time, I mean, Rivarossi would have been amazing. Bowser would have been better. Brass was considered the pinnacle. Most guys were scared to even run it. But it always takes a few people in an industry or a hobby to say that's not good enough and figure out how to make it better. And part of what we're getting today is thanks to fellows like you, and there's a select few of them that said, no, we're going to take this to a whole nother level, boys.
That's right.
And then now that's what we're benefiting from.
The models today are actually the result of work like this.
Sure.
Because I think the industry learned that there are modelers that want this. They want the completely detailed replica instead of just like a faux
Basic version.
copy.
Right.
To me, you know, the Lionel stuff, it's a toy. It's a faux copy of the original thing. I love the New York Central Hudson, but when you look at a Lionel Hudson, there's basically no resemblance.
Right.
Because there isn't any detail, you know.
It's a toy.
It's a toy. It's a toy. And to me, a locomotive is one of the most beautiful artistic objects out there. The way it's constructed, the way it works, you know, and all by steam. Incredible. I mean, you know, it's an incredible invention. Why shouldn't we make these models as good as we can possibly do it? And to do that, I think you have to have all the detail parts rendered exactly to scale, exactly where they belong, put all the pipes on, everything that shows.
Pipes going where they should go.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly where they should go, because so many models don't have that.
Right, they just end.
Yeah.
And you told us a little bit about something that you had designed as far as the centering of an articulated piece in reference to the Big Boy. Tell us a little bit about that.
All right. Yeah, that was one of my biggest, you know, I soon learned that model articulated locomotives don't track well. When I say track well, what I mean is they don't follow the track as well as a solid frame locomotive. Like a 484 goes around a curve and comes back out, it's generally straight along with the track. An articulated locomotive has two engines, the front engine and the rear engine. And because it's articulated, meaning it has a pivot point in the middle, the front engine is more or less loose. The boiler is mounted on the rear engine. So the rear engine generally determines which way the boiler will move, in which direction. You take an articulated locomotive around a curve, the front engine should follow the curve, but when the curve straightens out, the front engine should also straighten out. Most model locomotives, O gauge, HO, makes no difference, never straighten out completely. The boiler always leans over to one side or the other. It's called nosing. And the reason for that is because the model locomotive does not have the centering device that the prototype locomotive has. In the case of the Big Boy, the prototype locomotive has a bar, a hollow tube with a spring inside.
Right.
And it's articulated from the center.
Sure.
So as the front engine moves to the left or to the right, it forces itself against the power of the spring. And when the front engine straightens out, the spring pushes that front engine to the center, therefore preventing the train from having, the engine from having a nose position.
Sure.
So there's no more nosing with the properly installed spring. The second thing, which is of even more importance, is the front boiler saddle on the engine. On a prototype engine, the front of the boiler rests on the top of the front engine with what's called a boiler saddle and the retainer plate. The saddle rests on top of the front engine, pushing its weight down on top of the front engine. Without that arrangement, the model becomes a 280. It's no longer
the power. Yeah,
there's no power because the front engine has no traction.
Right.
And this was the first model ever made, I believe, in HO scale at least, that had it properly articulated and properly sprung that way. All of the vertical motion of the axle has to be taken up by the driver's springs.
Okay.
And as long as you don't go over a 10-degree grade with the thing, which of course is impossible in HO gauge, the engine will not derail. Most people say, oh, that's too long, that's going to derail. It will not. The driver's springs will take up the action.
Very nice.
Guaranteed.
Wow.
So even today, as far as we've come, there's improvements that can yet to be made in
Exactly.
brass
This still
models.
is not being done commercially, as far as I know.
So that's why we keep pushing.
That's what I keep telling people.
I know we promised our guests this was a special episode. We might even have to go over a couple episodes here because there's so much great info. We just can't cut anything. You know all about editing, but I don't think we want any of this to hit the cutting room floor. It's all gold. Right, Pat? No editing. We'll just spread it out. Thanks, Bob. It's been a joy having you.
All right, thank you. All right.
Well, we promised you a little behind-the-scenes peek at some of our renovations. It seems like one thing that never changes around here is things are always changing. You can see as we go along that what we've really tried to do is incorporate certain elements that we had actually built for the Brass Expo, and you're going to see how we did that. But we have really tried to create a spot with a lot of history and something that's really interesting to our guests who come visit. Even the cases here are interesting. These cases originally were in the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit. They ended up in the Glenn Reed Museum, and then when we acquired a number of models from him, we actually bought these beautiful cases. And they're filled with all sorts of history. We have all the gem ruby models. We have very unique and customized brass models, and just a little odds and ends history of the hobby in general. Of course, many of you will recognize Ron Shea. We're proud to say it's virtually complete now. Eventually, it's going to be painted brass and tarnished and little solder marks, and it'll look just like you're looking through this little eye loop at that brass model, that PFM one like we promised. And it surely is a thing of beauty, isn't it? So it's another thing that's really worth a visit. Right now, we just want to enjoy it in its natural state, how Ron built it. So we're going to leave it here like this for a while. You can see we have a lot of history around here. These are some of the very early parts of the model railroad history. So if you visit, and we're giving you just a glimpse, you're going to see some construction in progress. But one of the very early projects that Ron had worked on is what we called the city in the window. And the goal is like you're looking out a window and you're up high, and eventually it will fade into the distance with models. And it's really an exquisite piece. So we're looking forward to completing this. It's something Ron's working on now. In our layout room, what we've decided to do is still have a model railroad layout, but really focus on the museum aspect of brass model trains. Back here, you might have caught a glimpse of those original Howard Fogg paintings. Those are really one of my favorite pieces of our collection because not only are they original Howard Fogg paintings, but they were done for the PFM catalog covers, and they were actually painted from brass models. So that's just one of the displays we have where you can see the model, you can see the catalog, and then you can see the original painting. These drum heads along the floor that you're going to see eventually will be all lit up and hung up high in the museum. And for those of you who did get to come to the Brass Expo, well, we were so frustrated that we could only use that museum for a few days a year that we kind of, we went back to the drawing board, we brainstormed, we put it in Ron's, we call it his rock tumbler, where we throw a little rock in there and it comes out with a polished thought. And this is what we figured we were going to do, is we're going to make this museum something permanent, although it could still be portable. where if we have visitors that come all through the year, they can appreciate the beautiful history of brass model trains. Some of you may recognize this as what we feel is the only unpainted fine art model in existence in its natural state. It was by one of the designers of that particular model had asked for one to be unpainted. These are early PFM catalog photographs and then overlaid with hand-drawn sketches. So you may have seen those throughout the years in the PFM catalogs, but it's really neat to see the history behind those and what went into them. And the whole museum, we can't show you everything, and that's not our goal today. We just want to whet your appetite. It's just full of history and unique things and rare things. And really, we're working hard to preserve the history of the hobby, and that's something we've done for a long time. So if you get a chance to visit and set up an appointment, perhaps with a group, then we would give you an extended guided tour. And on future episodes of Monday Morning Express, we're certainly going to do that as well. And you'll see we're really kind of trying to carry this theme through a very large area. These are original oil paintings by Winfield and a few other artists. We have more drum heads that will be hung. We have all sorts of actual memorabilia too. And most of this is completely original. Some of the drum heads are reproductions, but much of what you see here is original. And so that's a brief tour as promised. There'll be more to come. Now we're going to go back out with Roland and Boyd Reyes.
One of the things that we wanted to highlight was, you know, the factory has certain aspects of the model, but afterwards you might want to do some upgrades. So tell us what we can do here, Boyd.
Well, for the older models, to make them look like the ones that just got released from Korea, Coachyard offers diaphragms, the same diaphragms that are put on their models. They offer these. You can either glue them on or solder them on. They come with little tabs.
Right.
They're sprung. They're
nice.
Yeah, a little sprung. But they come with all kinds of different plates. Right here, I'll lay that plate down like that. See all kinds of different ends that you can, from Southern Pacific. Let me flip this around. Right there, Southern Pacific and Santa Fe and different types of striking plates. And yeah, you can just really make one of these old models look snappy, you know, just with all these details.
Yeah.
And I found out that one of the best ways of securing these diaphragms to the model is canopy glue. They say, you know, that stuff works really good. It's flexible. It holds up a lot of. ACC was used by some people, but you know, when your car gets hit or constant banging or whatever, it does tend to fall off. So I find out that the softer glue, a canopy glue.
Okay.
That stuff works great.
And what else you get over there?
Okay, well, we got like antennas. Like sometimes these older models, the antennas, the stanchions on it can be replaced. Details West, Details Associates, and Owl Mountain models. Now, contacting Jason Hill, he's made like detail parts that are that are not available to your average person. So he will do the 3D models, and these hatches are for like right up here. If you want to add the hatches, you have to sand the bottom of them to make the contour fit the model. But they're really nice for adding a lot of details. There's propane bottles or the enclosures, storage tanks. We're coming out with stuff for private cars, you know, extra storage tanks and fuel tanks, and you name it. We're gonna come out with all these little accessories. But these stanchions that he made for the Southern Pacific or Santa Fe cars, pretty much most other railroads, you can just, they got little tabs. You could just drill all your holes and start plugging them in and just layer wire up on top, and you can
make it look nice.
Pretty fancy. Yeah, the earlier cars used to have just pieces of wire sticking up and solder, and the new stuff's really detailed, brings out a lot of these little extra things, can make a car come out really nice.
So Owl Mountain products.
Owl Mountain models.
Okay, beautiful to be able to really accessorize any of these models like that. That's nice to have such a resource available.
Yeah, yeah. For some of these hatches, these were big in demand, so it just depends. I mean, he can make quite a bit of parts, but there's some things that just depends on how many people want them. How many pieces. We have to pay, like these hatches. These hatches, the first batch that we made, they were expensive, but after that, the cost drops as you start buying more. Because we have to pay for the artwork. The 3D, we gotta pay for those hours. Once that gets submitted to Shapeways is the company that will print these out. They'll either print them out in plastic. They do the 3D printing.
Right.
So they'll print them out in plastic, and then they'll also do your casting in brass. So you have different options of how you want your stuff made, either in brass or plastic or the resin.
Excellent. So just wonderful information that you've been able to share with us these past few days. And I, for one, just want to say thanks. We appreciate you taking out your busy schedule, your time to share with us, and we've really learned a lot about the tips, the tricks, the techniques that go into making these desirable models. And certainly we see anything with the name Boyd Reyes on it, we know that it's top notch, and we got to see that here this week.
Oh,
so thanks again, my friend.
Thanks.
We appreciate you having us out here in
I just want to see more painters out there. You know, I need guys to help out. I can't paint everything, and it'd be really neat if everybody started ordering this stuff, because you know what? The more people order it, it's going to become available. It's not going to disappear. I mean, we have all these manufacturers who make interior parts, detailed parts, and I need them to stay in business. So that way we have these products available to us.
And it's downright fun to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's great. Just buy a car and, a simple car, and you find out you'll come out with something pretty snappy with that.
Well, thanks again, Boyd. We appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome.
Good morning. I'm Jerry Spoma over here at the Whistle Stop in Pasadena, and you're watching Monday Morning Express.
Well, Dan, that wrapped it up with our series with Boyd Reyes out in California. So it's extended quite a few weeks, but I just wanted to say thanks, Boyd. We really appreciated you allowing us into your home, and of course all of the wonderful tips and tricks that you've shown us in this painting process. You're truly a professional. We've gotten a lot of comments about it. And I personally just wanted to say thank you again for being on the show for all of these weeks.
Yeah, we got people clamoring for a DVD already. Painting brass trains with Boyd Reyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they'll have to just settle for going back and rewatching the MME episodes.
Yeah.
And Boyd will get you out here one of these days. So
hey, I think we could put him to work.
Yeah,
I got an idea.
We'll find something. We'll find something for you to do out here.
All right.
And as you've seen when we were talking with Bob, which what a great interview that was. What a great person to have in our studio here. And we promised we wouldn't cut anything. Unfortunately, we had to make it fit. But don't worry, we're going to fill you in next week with the rest of that. So even more great footage with Bob Darwin next week on our show.
And speaking of next week, we're going to do a little bit more soldering. We're going to go out to the master with the resistance soldering. So we're going to see Bill Peter of PBL, and he's going to show us a few little tricks, and you're going to see how he has no sensitivity in his fingertips. I don't know how he does it, but looking forward to that on next week's show.
The grandfather of soldering.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot to learn from there. And of course, let's see, where else are we going?
Bill Boren.
Bill Boren, second part of that interview. I really enjoyed my time with Bill. I think if you caught him on the last episode, we showed him some very informative information, so we'll get a little bit more with him. And then we have a sale coming up this Friday, our biggest sale of the year.
That's right. The annual sale starts this Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. So take a look at our site at brasstrains.com. Current specials. You are going to see thousands of items there for sale. We do this every year, and our customers just love it. So we look forward to having that on our site for the rest of this week in the month of December. Looking forward to that.
And we almost hate to tell you this, but this season is winding down. All these things winding down. Boyd's winding down. He's done 3 more episodes.
Well, Boyd's not done.
Not done. Done for this part.
That's right. That's right.
He always manages to find his way back into these episodes somehow or the other. But 3 more episodes. So we have some kind of neat things planned in store. We'll try to knock it out of the park with our season finale. So thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next week on Monday Morning Express.